We are back with more NFL coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering all the most recent developments around the league over the past week and some change. Of course, there has been no NFL action to this point. We do have Pro Bowl games tomorrow, so that should be exciting. We do have, as well, the Super Bowl coming up, and man, I am going to be excited for that. Honestly, the way things are looking, I ain't gonna lie to you. Man, if I'm feeling away, if things go according to how I think the team is going to perform in that game, man, I cannot wait. But to hold it over, we got to go through some of this stuff first. So to get straight into it, the Jets started out this with parting ways with a great number of their staff. Of course, to this point, they've established that Aaron Glenn was going to stay. They were going to give him another chance, and he wasn't going to be ousted like Jerod Mayo was after his first season. However, we cannot say the same thing about some of these other staffers. At the top of that list was offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand. Of course, they hired him over from the Lions. As I reported last offseason, and, in that time, they were trying to give this a shot. It's safe to say that it just did not work well at all. Now, again, as we've said already about the Jets, the season was shit. And they already made the move initially to fire Steve Wilks with that historically ineffective defense. Okay? We don't even need to get into how bad some of the scores were throughout these games for the Jets. With that being said, in that time, these games are reaching garbage time before we even have time in some of these cases, right? If you find a way to look even remotely competent at some point in the game offensively, honestly, Engstrand would probably still have a job right now. The thing is that even when they were trying to be reliant on the offensive end, even before it got just atrocious out there, the offense still left a lot to be desired. I mean, all season long, there was just nothing really creative at all about his offense. Everything, and I mean everything, you could attribute that to personnel, you could attribute that to the scheme that he was utilizing, whatever. They were rendered virtually useless on that side of the football. Like, genuinely useless. I can't even lie to you. Now, again, we do have to consider, everything that went down with the team. Of course, you can't start this without not addressing the elephant in the room that was the instant just drawback from having Justin Fields out there. When I tell you, oh my gosh, dude. As much as I've been a Justin Fields defender over the years, I don't think that one could truly look at what happened last season, even before he went on IR to close out the year. I don't think anybody can look at that and say that, hey, that looked like competent quarterback play out there. Don't be fooled by the completion percentage. Because in non-starts, the man was dead-ass averaging just barely over 100 yards a game. And a lot of that could be chalked up to what he did in the very first one. This is the craziest part. This could have been so much different for the Jets. They came out firing in game one, taking it to, again, a defense that was the most expensive in the NFL in Pittsburgh, and hanging 32 points on them, and damn near coming back to win that ball game. It was a great exhibition to start out his time there. And I said as much when talking about that game in that particular recap for week one. You'd think you'd be able to keep that momentum going and ride it for at least the first half of the season. It took them virtually no time to just lose all of that. It was ridiculous. And then You had an 0-7 start. Again, like, that's just a massive hole to deal with. But again, in some of these games, like, you're dead ass not even running anything that makes any sense. The rushing attack took a massive step back this season. And it's interesting to look at that and say that, hell, this team was still so reliant on the run because they could not throw the ball to save their lives. You can't have multiple games in this day and age in the NFL, even if, honestly, it's a pass-happy league, but with some of the teams that are at the peaks of their powers, things have kind of leveled out. Look no further than the Bills and what they were able to do in terms of running the ball this season. My thing is, you have to have a strong suit offensively. And Engstrand, even if you want to look at the lack of personnel, lack of talent out there at times throughout the season, and give him a pass for that, at the same time, we got to be able to find something consistent from you. We can't have multiple games over the course of an NFL season where you don't even reach 50 passing yards. And need I remind y'all, or y'all probably don't even want to remember this, the atrocity that was that international game against Denver, where they logged negative 10 passing yards for a net total at that time because of how much he was getting pressured over and over and over and over and over again. This team is going to need a lot of work, genuinely speaking. You know, they say that Fashanu was honestly doing okay as an offensive lineman this season, and he still got time to get it together. You know, he was a rookie last season, so there were going to be some growing pains there. Understood. Membo was a rookie last season. Fashanu was the rookie the season before. So they're fairly young in that aspect. And then when you look at the talent outside, it's... You figured coming into the season that all you were going to have was Garrett Wilson. They did not anticipate him going down on IR to pretty much end his season early, honestly. And even when he was playing, it was just you know that this is your number one guy, and you still can't find a way to get him fed enough. Because again, the passing designs are just so obnoxiously terrible that even if you do put Justin Fields in the best possible position, and even if he does take the step forward at this time to actually stretch the ball down the field, could it actually be done? You couldn't guarantee that. Genuinely, I don't know what it was. Because at that point, if you're Engstrand, if you were truly effective in the rushing attack, and granted, they tried to initiate that so much, they quickly became one-dimensional because they didn't have a single receiver on this team throughout the entire year, regardless of who stepped in or not. Nobody on the team logged over 400 yards receiving. Do you know how insane that is? Nobody. And Garrett Wilson, to that point, still led the team in receiving yards, despite missing the last 10 games due to injury. Now, again, you can't help Justin Fields going on IR, and you can't even help Tyrod Taylor stepping in for a brief period of time, doing okay, and then having to rely on Brady Cook for the rest of the season. That's not something you can really control much of either. But my fucking goodness, like I already said, at this point, with this climate in the NFL, and you don't even reach something that should be routine. In an optimal world, you would have reached that milestone of at least, a 400-yard wide receiver within at least the first 5 games or so. I'll be generous about that. At least the first 5 games. You win an entire season with that kind of ineptitude offensively. And it was just something that spread across the entire team. Again, the injuries are a part of the game, and that's not something you can control necessarily. But even when you look at the lack of talent that they have At some point, as an offensive coordinator or as any coach, you have to show some kind of ability, some kind of redeeming quality within what you are running to at least showcase that, hey, it's not going according to plan this season. We couldn't have anticipated any of this. But with some of the things that I'm putting on display here, I can have you guys put a little more faith in what it is that I'm trying to build with this team over the next few years to come. At least that. Give me something that I can build upon so that when we get into the offseason, like we're nearing now, we can build around that system. We can chalk it up to, having to get a few other players healthy, but we can work around that in time and allow you to continue to evolve in a positive direction so that we can move this team forward the right way. Instead, they were all the way at fucking rock bottom as a collective. Like, that Bengals win, again, as I said at the time, it was massive credit to them. For them to come back in that ball game and for them to honor Nick Mangold in that way with their first win of the season. But that stood out as an anomaly. They would not have another offensive day like that. And in fact, that game was their season high in terms of passing yards. Just think about that. They didn't even have to reach 250 to accomplish that. But again, a game where you establish some balance running for 254 yards on the ground at that time. That was a tremendous showing. And yeah, you could take it with a grain of salt because, well, the Bengals defense is an entirely different story in and of itself. But they were never able to replicate that again. And again, just a consistent decline throughout the rest of the season for them. So it's understandable why they would fire Engstrand. And he wasn't the only one. They would go after a number of different people. Because at that point, even though this is an experiment, this is a trial basis per se, it's the very first season of this. But this is what we're getting. The 31st overall defense in the league and the 29th overall offense. I don't care what fucking position you are in. We've already expressed faith in the head coach, and the head coach can make decisions elsewhere with these kinds of hirings and firings. They have a say in that. And Glenn took it upon himself to just lay waste and clear up most of these positions. I completely understand him. We cannot and will not tolerate having that around again. We can't settle for that. Because if that is going to be the fucking standard, what am I even taking on this job for? If that is the output that we're settling for on a season-to-season basis, it's not worth it. For one of their initial hirings, they would take a chance on Brian Daboll as their next defensive coordinator to replace Steve Wilks. And he was formerly the defensive passing game coordinator for the Dolphins. Now again, I take that with a grain of salt. Like, yes, the Dolphins defense was shit too, but at the same time, they were able to perform a little better, and there were some highlights this season from Daboll in that regard. Plus, again, having that kind of control of the team in that situation, it's kind of tricky. We're accounting for the entire passing game here, but even then, it's not like the guy in his position can account for the load of injuries that he had to confront with the cornerback room before the season even went underway. Or got underway, I should say. There's nothing that one can really do in that situation. So, again, while it's rare to say that, you can honestly give Duker some credit for really doing the best that one can do in a situation like that. It is hard to expect the man to overcome that consistently. But to be honest, with all that being said, he did fairly well. He did not allow a single 300-yard game. If he's handling the passing game specifically, he didn't. You could say that technically he did. I mean, that Pats blowout was pretty bad. They came back in that game, I should say, to win. And that was a rough showing, I should say. But I mean, yeah. Oh, I'm tripping like crazy. Okay, I'm looking at it all types of wrong. They did give up a couple of 300-yard games back-to-back on the tail end. Of course, Burrow lit their ass up in the game that they decided to roll out Quinn Ewers, and then the next week, this was kind of garbage time from Baker Mayfield, but he still managed to get over that mark. So there were a couple, but otherwise, it's fairly routine. They were able to put some pretty good dents in here, all things considered, despite having that lackluster core of corners on the outside. And I will say that, we talk all about the corners this, the corners that when it comes to this team. But to be honest, the strength for them throughout the season really came from their linebacking core, especially with what Jordan Brooks was able to put on display. Now, again, it wasn't always looking like that in Seattle. There were some moments with him where he looked to be solid, but, in the offseason, they decided to just move on from him because they considered at that point it just wasn't worth taking much more of a chance on him, especially when they already had the services of Ernest Jones IV on display. They didn't need him anymore. Now, again, a change of scenery might have been better for Jordan Brooks at the time, and honestly, it looks like that has paid off for him. That season would place him as one of the best linebackers in the league, point blank, period. And he was doing it all over the place. He was getting done in pass coverage. He was a great run stopper throughout the entire season for them. So Duker's ability to maximize that was definitely a highlight of his last season there. So if you can have some of that same stuff go down, and I mean, hell, the Jets, the Jets themselves, they went through it multiple times throughout the year. They understand what Duker's capable of. So if you can have some of that same influence translate over to your team, you're more than willing to take a chance on it. Again, you got to start somewhere. You're not going to get the flashy hire because genuinely from, more of the high-profile names out there, and granted, when you look at a few guys out there who were in the cycle at defensive coordinator, namely Chris Shula, for example, there was a great opportunity for them to go get him, but in reality, with those top-tier names, who in their right mind would want to come to a team that showed little promise at all last season? So it's them really just trying to test the waters. I don't know if Duker was going to, be a guy that they always had their sights on, but given what you went through last season and understanding that, hey, he knows the tendencies already, it's like you may as well just poach him from a division rival at that point. The Broncos, moving on to this, they would fire Joe Lombardi, their offensive coordinator. Honestly, this one is a little weird to me. People were kind of like chalking it up to Sean Payton just deciding to do it because of what happened in the AFC divisional round. And I'll say that I'm not too sure about that. If that is his logic, it's a little busted. What we can say about the Broncos offense throughout the entire season is honestly, it helped them get by, we understood throughout the entire year that it wasn't going to be one that would take the league by storm. They had moments where they were just seemingly out of the game entirely. It took them quite a while to get warmed up on that side of the football, to be completely honest with you. Look no further than this Giants game. The fact that they were radio silent for that much time, yet were still able to put up 33 points in the fourth quarter alone. And then followed that up with back-to-back weeks where they got over 30 plus by hanging 44 on the Cowboys. Although their defense, again, we understand they were garbage at that point, right? So it's not like they were just completely anemic on the offensive side of the football, but there were a few games, especially when you look at just a few. I mean, that aforementioned London game, the Thursday night disaster that was their first matchup against the Raiders, or them again somehow allowing Chris Oladokun to have even a remote chance of beating them on Christmas Day. It wasn't all pretty with this team on that side. And the way in which they were conducting things was a little weird, to be honest. It's like, yes, Bo Nix was able to take a step forward, although in no way, shape, or form should he be throwing 612 passes overall. I do, when you look at it that way. With his overall skill set, that number feels a little too high. And again, that was largely due to the fact that, again, due to a number of things, they could not effectively establish the rushing game. For most of the season, they were okay. For most of the season. Especially when J.K. Dobbins was in. He remained their leading rusher despite being out after pretty much week 10. So, you look at that, it's pretty interesting, to be honest. But if that system would have held, chances are that they probably last a little better in the Bills, well, not in the Bills, in the Pats game, like I said, right at that point. Because, again, to constantly rely on shorter guys like McLaughlin and especially R.J. Harvey, even though this guy, again, was a workhorse at UCF, was doing it all, so he can handle that responsibility, you need a guy of J.K. Dobbins' caliber to be leading that offensive attack when it comes to running the ball. And losing him took pretty much a good amount of momentum on that front away completely at that point. So, if anything, maybe looking at it from that standpoint, I can't say that Joe Lombardi was going to be the safest character. I can't say that. I can't assume that. But at the same time, you understood coming into the season and you saw throughout the entire season that the defense was going to be the strength of this team and that you were going to lean on that, if I'm being honest with you. He has honestly made this team look pretty good offensively in each of the 3 seasons that he's been with Denver, as I'm seeing. Like, the fact that you go from Russell Wilson to rookie Bo Nix and then have Bo Nix elevate into, even better play overall throughout the season, it's like you can't look at that and just instantly say that you'll move on from the man. I'm not too sure about, jumping the gun that early. And considering that you're going to lean on your defense to get the job done anyways. When you look at them this season, as I'm seeing here, especially throughout the regular season, let me see. They only had about 17 turnovers as an offense on the season. That's 1 per game. So, by nature, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing on your end. Yes, the amount of times that they just stalled out on these crazy long drives were getting ridiculous to a point. But they were establishing ball control in these games. They were protecting the football in these games. And most importantly, for them, they understood that the defense could get it back for them. And they leaned on that. And time again throughout all of these games. That was why they won. All you needed was to have a steady flow on that side of the offensive, on that side of the ball, I should say. And Lombardi, with the way he called things, with the way that he trusted Bo Nix and those guys to get the job done, and also having some of the offensive linemen like Bowles, like Miners, put together stellar seasons that launched them into all-pro conversations, he more than accomplished that. So again, if this is true from Sean Payton, that he decided to make the move as a result of that, I would hope it isn't, but it's just reactionary, and it's frankly dumb. You don't need your offense to be completely over the top because your defense is that damn good. And again, even with Joe Lombardi being the OC, it was still Sean Payton calling a number of the plays here. So to bear all responsibility on Lombardi for what may or may not have happened in that game and through all of the other games this season would just be illogical. Because it's Payton, that's the play caller, or handling those duties as the head coach. Not Lombardi. So, this is a questionable move to me. Like, he did his job. I don't know if the Broncos would be able to find much better at the offensive coordinator position. They still have a chance. Nothing new has happened from them just yet. But it's like, man, are we serious right now? And then the Titans would hire Brian Daboll as offensive coordinator to work alongside Robert Saleh this season. They are honestly hoping in that scenario because Cam Ward is not exactly Josh Allen, in the sense that with the way Ward had been playing in his final season at college, to be honest, there were far fewer, I should say, question marks about his game coming out of college than there were with Josh Allen at that time, before Brian Daboll was credited with just completely revamping his entire playing style and turning him into a quarterback that, again, wasn't an MVP caliber quarterback. That was Joe Brady's, work in that situation. But at the very least, Brian Daboll put him on the right path to become a truly dynamic quarterback and just unlocked his potential at that time. Cam Ward was viewed as the safe pick entering the draft. That's why he went number 1. And he did put together a tape this season overall that isn't going to go down as the greatest overall for a rookie quarterback out there. But towards the end of the season, and even across a few games, generally speaking, there were flashes from the man where you looked at being able to build off of something quite amazing from what Ward was putting on display. And to have Daboll in this position again is honestly not a bad idea. It's going to take that in order for this thing to work. And it's not going to be easy in year number 1 for Ward, at least on the outside looking in, but any number of things could happen. And I'd be very intrigued to see how it looks. My thing is this. We need to figure out what is going on with the rushing game there. It was inconsistent, and I don't give a shit about them taking it to the Browns in that game and running roughshod over that defense. I don't give a shit. In most other games this season, they couldn't initiate it at all. And a lot of the struggles from Cam Ward, although some of it is self-imposed, right, naturally, having the rookie jitters and everything like that, the best thing that you can do as a football team to settle them down in that situation is to establish some kind of balance on the offensive side of the football with a formidable rushing attack. At the very least, allow them to take the burden off. And throughout the season, it was just, especially before we even get to that Browns game, the first 13 damn games, you could say that they were one of the worst. Or at least the first 13 weeks, I should say. You could consider them as one of the worst rushing offenses in the entire NFL. The entire one. They did have a couple of 100-yard performances, but it's not like they were efficient. And in a good portion of these other games, they were just so atrociously bad on that front. To the point where they finished with as low as 39 rushing yards against the Patriots in Week 7. We can't keep having lapses like that. And we want to be able to reach a point where we can put the offense in the hands of Cameron Ward fully and say, you know what, go take this over for us. We trust you fully and wholeheartedly to be able to lead us to a victory. And I'm like, no, he's not there yet. You got to help him reach that point. Help me help you. Like, they thought that Tony Pollard was going to be a solid runner, and for a while he was. Then you get into this season with him and Tajay Spears, and they just do nada, virtually whatsoever, for the first 13 weeks of the season, as they just piss it all away to that point. And then you want to start turning it up with 4 straight 100-yard games on the ground when the season's already lost, when you're already out of playoff contention. Like, no, we have to be consistent on that front the entire time. Say what you want about, how things went in New York for Brian Daboll overall. It's the reason why he was fired early. But at the very least, they were able to do that. You can't deny that. They made the most out of Jackson Dart's dual threat ability, and they were able to run the ball good enough, especially when Scatterboo was back there. And even in games where Tracy Jr. returned to the lead role, they were able to do just enough to have that kind of burden lifted off of Jackson Dart's shoulders temporarily. At the very least, offer me that. Because Ward, to this point, there are still things in his game that do need to be improved. Like, it's not all perfect for him, of course. But the only way you can empower him to reach that point is by, again, flanking him with solid contributions elsewhere. And that does also mean eventually, because the Titans are going to have another top pick, no disrespect to Chimere Dike. There's a reason why he's a Pro Bowl caliber return specialist, and that's why he's in, right? No disrespect to him. No disrespect to Alec Ayamanor. He's still young himself. Can we get a wide receiver in the building? Can we? Again, as much as I love Tyler Lockett as well, he's not going to be a true number one at this point, and that's why they let him go. You also can't control Calvin really getting hurt either, but at this point, he is now in his early 30s, and I don't know, with the contract that he has, how much time he'd be willing to spend with this team anymore. So you have to start thinking about that from your perspective, just to get somebody younger with a lot of potential that you can have Cam Ward pair up with and build chemistry with over time. But at face value, it's a decent move to go out there and get Daboll on their front. Meanwhile, the Browns, talking about them, they would make a decision that I honestly alluded to. Like earlier in the season, we get to that point and you hear all these rumblings about Todd Monken potentially going out and getting a head coaching position if they were not able to re-sign him, the Ravens, at this point of time. And I was just joking around at the time. I wasn't even being remotely serious, and I was just fucking around and saying that, hey, Monken has a chance to do the funniest thing ever if they don't re-sign him. There's a world in which he could go over to the Browns and they could poach him from the team to become their next leading man. And little did I know that last week I would be proven right for some reason, because the Browns would go out and make that move that, again, I wasn't even being serious in that situation. I was genuinely joking. Who knew that they were actually going to hire Todd Monken as their new head coach? Like, that's still so hilarious to me. Like, I guess I did call it in that situation. I just wasn't expecting that to be the case. A number of people have had their own criticisms about it. On the one hand, yes, Todd Monken was having a bit of a power struggle, I'll say, between, calling plays and also trying to defer as much as possible to Harbaugh in some of these scenarios and how he wanted to operate the team. I will admit that. But you have people trying to hold a lot against him, and granted, it ain't going to be all smooth with him. Whether it be not giving Derrick Henry the ball in the most important moments of the game, whether it be constantly just leaning so heavily on these shorter routes that don't really predicate on creating much separation at all. And granted, Ravens wide receivers, for the most part, outside of Zay Flowers, could not do that. Whether it be due to age or lack of speed, you name it. They did not have that quality about themselves this season. So it definitely limited what Monken was once able to do with this team. And to just sabotage yourself like that, your strength is in the rushing attack, and to stray away from it at multiple key moments in these games, a lot of them being situations where they allow teams to just come back after they'd already established the lead, after they'd already seemingly had all the momentum on their side. They lose it in pretty much every unfathomable way that you could dream up and make up on the fly. They did that shit this season. So from an offensive standpoint, to have a creative mind like Monken go through that is unacceptable, considering what he was doing at other stops. And honestly, that Lamar Jackson being out was naturally going to hurt this team as well. I'll say, as a part of Monken's defense. Now, yeah, are you supposed to be putting your players in a much better position to succeed? Yes. However, it's not like Monken himself is solely responsible for how the line was constructed. Of course, he's going to have some say in, how they run things and how the scheme looks for the offense. But that offensive line, you cannot convince me for a second that this was his doing. No, this was the result of just complete and total mismanagement over years on that front. And admittedly, Linderbaum has been a good pickup for them at the center position. But in most other cases, there's just so much wrong with that offensive line. And ultimately, that was what led to the injury that pretty much put their season on ice, as if it wasn't already a terrible start for them already. So I'm not putting that all on Todd Monken in this situation. I can't bring myself to do that. What I will say is this. Monken, in this scenario, I mean, hell, he is related to Army's head coach, his cousin, I believe, in Todd Monken. So that's pretty fucking interesting, right? That kind of presence already for a much younger team overall in Cleveland, they may need that kind of presence in their locker room right now. Because if anything, that's a character that's going to attest to a lot of the veterans in that room, namely Myles Garrett, but also be able to, get some kind of genuine ability out of these younger players and encourage them to at least hear him out and listen to what he has to say. Stefanski, at that point, there were reports of him losing the locker room and stuff like that. So to regain it from that standpoint with a very established presence in Monken at this point as a general figure on any team when it comes to being on the coaching staff should help situate that immediately. Plus, hey, I saw the clip of it, but of course, we understand that Shedeur Sanders was nearly drafted by the Ravens last year at this point. So, Monken, of course, is going to be working more with Lamar Jackson in that situation. And even I said at the time, I wasn't going to make much of that because of the fact that you already had a two-time MVP in Lamar Jackson as your starter. There wouldn't have been a need to stockpile there. But this is genuinely somebody that Monken has wanted to work with for the longest period of time. Now, of course, they need more help, and genuinely everywhere. Not only is their offensive line weak themselves, they're old as shit. Cam Robinson is unproductive and old. One of their other offensive tackles is like 34 years old. Not to mention the fact that Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin, as good as those guys can be, they're also getting up there in age, and they were on IR this season. So it's not like even if you have that decision made up where Sanders is going to be your clear-cut man, and that's the most important thing for me. That is the most important thing for me right there. And I think that's something that virtually nobody has talked about. Nobody. Do you understand how dysfunctional it is to constantly keep a rotating cast of quarterbacks in throughout an entire season? And yes, the Browns could still potentially deal with that, depending on how Deshaun Watson performs, which is bullshit. But at the very least, as it stands right now, Monken's going out the bat for Sanders. And that is something that for the first time in his young NFL career already, with all this noise going on about pretty much everything else outside of actually playing football in his career before stepping in last season, there's a world in which Shedeur Sanders can put out a full exhibition, a full contribution, a full body of work across an entire season, unbothered, unfazed by anything else that might be going on in the quarterback room, as long as he plays relatively well. So that's a massive benefit there. And, looking at it position by position, there are things to work on as well. He doesn't exactly have a Derrick Henry in terms of a running back on this team, but Judkins and Sampson, when they are both healthy, I think Judkins may take a little bit more time to come back, given his injury. But at the very least, when those guys are healthy, you have a solid two-headed monster there. Wide receivers on the other end. The Browns definitely need to draft one. I don't even think that's up for debate. It's just not. They need one. Straight up, bro. So there's work to be done there. Like, I do believe that Monken can help to turn this team around. Like, that voice is going to be tremendously important. And the confidence that Sanders will have instilled, knowing that, hey, as long as this guy's here, I have a genuine chance. And I'm going to get the maximum amount of opportunities that I would need to show who I really am on the football field. That goes a long way. So I think that could be definitely interesting. It's crazy, man. Because as someone said, and hell, I would agree too, pretty much the entire AFC North, no matter how you slice it, looks different except for the Bengals. You can't blame the Browns for trying at this point. It hasn't worked out with Stefanski. Okay, we're going to pivot. They may not understand our pivot. They may shit on it, but we are trying. Meanwhile, the Bengals have just been nothing but mediocre over the past few seasons, and they didn't want to do anything. I mean, seriously, like, don't get at Cleveland. Like, you got to at least credit them for taking a shot at things. So I would view it from that standpoint. For a few moves here, the Packers would hire former Bills defensive coordinator Bobby Babich, and he's going to be on their defensive staff. I don't think his role was made specifically clear. But, again, naturally, by losing a defensive coordinator like Jeff Hafley, you're going to have to start finding other ways to fill that role. Honestly, the Bills' defense was not particularly great throughout the course of the entire season, and some of that may also have to do with injury. The fact that Ed Oliver Jr. had missed that much time from earlier in the season to pretty much the conference, well, not the conference championship, the divisional round game against the Broncos says a whole hell of a lot about how things were going for them at that time. And again, the Packers, with them already being able to go out and get themselves a true defensive coordinator as it is, to have someone with that kind of expertise working behind you is not at all a bad idea, to be completely honest. So I can't fault them for making that move. Let me see. Yeah, because I gotta look at their initial hire at the defensive coordinator position here. And yeah, like Jonathan Gannon again. As I said at that time, it's like you definitely got a good one there. And Gannon again is going to, be handling a lot of the responsibility on that side. But again, you've got to have some help somewhere. So to have Babich there is not a bad thing. The Chargers, to replace Jesse Minter, would hire Chris O'Leary as defensive coordinator. He's coming out of Western Michigan. And for them to just get some insight as to how they performed this season. And I'm already hearkening back to how it was with me going through everything for the last transfer portal video. That is the one currently up on the channel now. But yeah, with Western Michigan this season, honestly, I will say that they closed it out as strong as a team possibly could. And you saw just how crazy that fucking defense was. Now, granted, Kennesaw State isn't really that great of a team. Kennesaw State isn't really that great of a team in my opinion, but they were bowl eligible. And in the first half of that game already, they packed them up and out of the building, with them winning it overall 41-6 as far as that game is concerned. Defensively overall for Western Michigan though, they were one of the best defenses in the entire nation. Yes, you can come at them for their strength of schedule. Some good old Wednesday night action, all right? But look it. The defense finished giving up just 17.4 points per game, which ranked them 9th in the fucking nation. 9th. They had a player in Adami Tucker who led the FBS in not only tackles for loss with 21, but sacks as well with 14.5 on the year, as the team acquired 83 tackles for loss and 43 sacks combined on the season. Like, they were truly one of the best units overall. Not to mention them getting 12 interceptions on the year and also forcing 13 fumbles, recovering 12 of them. You look at it in every sense of the word. They had the fucking pass rush. They had the ability to turn a team over. They had the ability to cover well when they needed to. They had the ability to provide genuine run support when they needed to. Multiple phases of the defensive side. They checked those boxes. And O'Leary, was a huge reason for that. It's not a, pickup that you always see go down. And I didn't even hear about the man being on the radar for a potential coaching job in the NFL. But hey, this is a perfect testament to what can happen sometimes for, some of these people when you have just somebody keying in on what exactly you're putting out, even if you are in the college football landscape. Because honestly, this could be a sneaky move. It wasn't too different for the Chargers, even the Ravens, technically speaking, when you had him come from Michigan, from the Harbaugh tree, in mentor at that time, and have him take on the defensive coordinator role. Now again, Chargers defense finishes a top 5 unit this season. And even though there was some slippage, again, overall, they were great. They have all the weapons you could ask for on that side. Although I would think that Khalil Mack is probably nearing retirement. No problem, because Tui Pelotu had himself a breakout year last year. Deion Henley's coming into his 3rd season as one of the bright young stars on that team. And then not to mention, some of the vets like Derwin James Jr., like Denzel Perryman even, when he is actually not trying to be a dirty football player, contributing well to this defense. You have O'Leary coming in off of a year where he's leading a college unit like that, where all they do is try to push the pace and try to score and outscore, at times, different teams. This defense ain't gonna miss a beat. Ain't gonna miss a fucking beat if he is producing at a similar level with the talent they already have on the roster and can potentially still add to. The Eagles would hire Sean Mannion as offensive coordinator, their new one, to replace Kevin Patullo. To be honest, I don't really know how this would go. It's not to really take a shot there, but in a similar way to David Blau, he himself is a former NFL quarterback, not particularly great, a career backup. But he'd most recently been with the Seahawks and Vikings even in 2023, which I was not even aware of. Could you fucking imagine? Like, oh my gosh. But yeah, no, he'd been out of the league at this point for at least a few seasons. And I guess, again, in a similar way, he's somehow gotten on the radar to where he now has himself an offensive coordinating position with a team. Is this a chance that the Eagles were willing to take? To be honest, I feel like they were looking in a different direction. Personally speaking, that's just me. But again, by that point, You already have so many good offensive coordinators off the board, and you're going to be left looking in some weirder places with all these different positions being filled up. So they had to just settle in this case and get Mannion. It's definitely interesting. I don't really know what to make of this. But, hey, it's much better than what the Dolphins decided to do. Because, we're already unsure if, Tagovailoa is going to remain their starting guy in Miami. And obviously, he took a massive step back this season to where he even had to get benched in the first place. Simply put. But to somehow pursue improvement, to somehow get better, they make a move that just doesn't align from that standpoint. Now, again, he's better at this kind of position, but the Dolphins would hire Nathaniel Hackett as their quarterbacks coach. What? What the fuck? What is that decision? Y'all saw him when he was last with the Jets in your own division, being pretty much a football terrorist when it came to calling shit plays. Do you know how many times this man was still, when he was out of a job, dialing up halfback screen, halfback screen, halfback screen? I still understand that was definitely where his mind was at that time. And again, Tagovailoa is a quarterback that, he doesn't have the greatest amount of arm strength. So, dialing up check down after check down after check down after check down may be exactly what Tagovailoa needs in order to be at his best. When he is making those precision reads, you saw what he was doing in 2023, committing to exactly that. But if Hackett could not get it done there, you are expecting him to do the same thing by trying to coach up Tagovailoa in this sense? You're just going to get the same message. Genuinely. Because you see the talent that Achane has, and it's still going to be halfback screen, halfback screen, halfback screen, drag play, drag play, drag play, halfback screen, more halfback screens. We'll throw in a toss to try to throw them off. Halfback screen. Dude, we're just going to keep spamming it up over and over and over again. This is just about to be truly disastrous. You would hope that it goes well for Miami, but nothing about the past few stops for Hackett has shown anything worth really investing in that regard. We don't even talk about what he was doing in Denver. As much shit as Sean Payton wants to talk, earlier in the season, and I addressed that, talking about Russell Wilson and trying to, crap on him and his time there. And again, granted, it wasn't great. Not to mention that the Broncos would just get themselves out of the guaranteed contract that they owe to Russell Wilson. And that just strapped them tremendously when it came to the salary cap. They've just now ended that. But you have Peyton doing that, and you don't take any accountability whatsoever for just calling it a spade and admitting that your hire of Hackett that offseason was horrible. It was one of the worst things you could have done. So that is the same Nathaniel Hackett we're talking about. Have we really seen him get better in this spot over the past few years? I genuinely don't believe so. So I don't know what the Dolphins think they're going to be able to accomplish from this. But I digress. To follow up in this sense, I won't spend too much time on it because I did address this already, in that they would have to wait for the season to be done in order to request a true interview and, finalize a potential deal with them. But for this entire time, when Matt Ryan took over as the president of general football operations there, they decided that for the general manager position, they were going to look into 4 different names. And one of those names was the Bears' assistant general manager at the time, Ian Cunningham. However, again, with the Bears set to face off against the Rams in the divisional round at that time, there was no way for them to be able to conduct further interviews with him or potentially ink him to a contract until after their season was done. It didn't have to be, as I already talked about in the recap there, but once it ended up going over, I believe that you would have Cunningham and them engage in a number of conversations in the coming days. And eventually it would get to a point where last week the Falcons would hire him as their new general manager. Gone are the days where Fontenot's dumbass tries to rationalize himself after making one of the dumbest moves in draft day history, to be completely honest with you. As they now look to honestly get a man in Cunningham who, again, being an assistant to the GM in Ryan Poles there in Chicago, I mean, dog. I am not too sure on, and I guess I can see real quick, how long he'd been around, with the Bears at that time, but let's be honest. Look no further than what his ass did in tandem with Poles. Seeing as he's going to be advising him on some moves, look at what they were able to do in just the past 3 years. You convince yourself at that time that, hey, we're already a team that is just terrible as it is, but we're not going to worry about moving on from Justin Fields just yet. Instead, we're going to just send the fucking house. We're going to get the number 1 overall pick for the next year and trade the draft rights to Bryce Young and others away, while swinging a move to get back a weapon in DJ Moore at the time. Then continue to add to that with all the trades and all the assets that we got in that initial move to build out a core that on this team right now is looking great. Okay, he was hired in 2022. And I mean, damn, what they were able to do from that point moving forward, centered mostly around that trade, is nothing short of a masterclass in how to propose moves and conduct trades. Nothing short of it. Like, you can argue that a good number of the players on this team right now are, at this point, because of that particular move. And that's how you're supposed to do it. They get Caleb Williams off the rip because they understand at that point, that that's your guy, and you're that willing to take such a huge gamble, waste another year potentially, and, go through another horrible season, then work towards turning it around. Again, year 1 of the Caleb Williams tenure was just not great overall. There were promises, there were flashes, but it gelled together perfectly. All those moves to offload those players put you in a position where you could then, after that season, start to work towards building out a roster with the draft and with free agency now at play, with having cap space cleared up. And you proceed to revamp the entire offensive line. You proceed to add even more talent in Colston Loveland and Luther Burden III. And then, honestly, what I will agree with here, because, they had the Tom Brady awards for the let's fucking go stuff. His catchphrase, right? I will agree with that selection there. Because for one of his awards, it was Best Value Player. And it was Nashawn Wright. And I could not agree less. I could not agree more, rather. Let me speak. I couldn't agree more with that decision there. Because even with all of that being talked about, even with everything that I just said, to also be able to find some low-key hits in the draft and in free agency, that's a tool that you also have to have as a general manager. And I don't even know if Poles was fully on board with getting him. Mind you, this man, Nashawn Wright, was genuinely a reserve player. And damn near, on the verge of being a practice squad guy for this team at multiple points. Then he moves over to the Bears and instantly puts together a season where he's leading the league in takeaways and is a part of a strong Bears defense. It puts them in an interesting position because now you've got to invest a little more in him, but you could probably still pay him a relatively cheap deal. It's stuff like that that's going to continue to, be placed and highlighted on your resume as you move forward into the NFL in this kind of space in the front office. And Cunningham has more than earned that for himself. So he's more than deserving of the job. And, the Falcons themselves, even with what Fontenot was doing, he did put together a great draft class. So is Cunningham going to be able to top it in year one? I'm not sure. But if he can continue to, find some solid guys here, their next step is going to be looking for offensive linemen as well. Again, it's not just centered on that. But at the same time, with the Falcons specifically, Jake Matthews, I didn't even know he was as old as he was. So, recognizing you're getting older on that front, you've got to start looking now for at least a potential contingency plan down the line. It's got to happen at some point. It's a good move. For a few more, the Rams would hire Bubba Ventrone as a special teams coordinator. The Bills would hire Pete Carmichael Jr. as an offensive coordinator. I was thinking that I'd heard of that name before previously, and he'd worked for the Saints last in 2023, as was mentioned, with something that I saw. Now, again, the Saints in 2023 were... It just, left a little bit to be desired. But Joe Brady, again, is going to be the guy, and even he said as such on the Pat McAfee show that he was going to be the one calling plays. But again, even with that kind of mind taking over control in that respect, you have to have some form of assistance. And you had to look somewhere. The Eagles would hire Josh Grizzard, as their passing game coordinator. Now again, the attack on that front for the Bucs through pretty much the first 6 games of the season was truly on a historic tear. I will be honest there. Like, it was damn near unmatched across the NFL. And then, again, over the last 11, they just tail off from that front completely. It ain't all that different from what the Eagles were going throughout the season. They had moments where, you had Jalen Hurts not throw the ball too much, yet be, explosive with the ball down the field enough to catch the defense off guard and feed A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith appropriately. at times. Again, it wasn't consistent enough this season, and A.J. Brown made it a point to express his frustration with that. We didn't hear that much from Devontae Smith either. But again, anytime you get in a situation, for example, to harken all the way back to this, where you are expecting the ball that much for that long to an extent where you get in essentially Hail Mary territory, and you have Smith and Brown in that Broncos game that they would ultimately lose, going for the ball at the same exact time and not having a single one of them, either one of them, come up with the ball in that situation. That told you everything you needed to know about how the Eagles' passing game was this season. And it wasn't just that game. As I've already referenced, look no further than the Lions game on Sunday Night Football, or the absolute nightmare that was the Monday night game against the Chargers, with him again seemingly having good looks down the field and just being a complete and total turnover machine, when he's usually known as a risk-averse quarterback. Hurts, that is. Right? So, from that standpoint, like, Grizzard has got a decent amount to work with there, and it could help bring things together for them. You know, to at least just level it out. At the same time, they've got to figure out their identity again. Like, are you going to want to be predominantly feeding those guys the ball on the outside? Or are you going to harken back to the mindset that made you Super Bowl champions last year and establish more of a rhythm on the ground? Get Jalen Hurts involved in situations where he can be more of a presence on the ground. I don't know at that point. The Vikings would do something pretty interesting, and they would fire their general manager in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. This was breaking news on Thursday, and to be honest, it did kind of catch me a little bit by surprise. Now, as things have gone on over the last few days, you know, coming out about it, I did come across something, and I'd have to look into it a bit further. For whatever reason, you know, they just bring out a report after his firing that, hey, he took a leave of absence for, you know, family leave essentially in 2023 to go spend time with his newly born child. And I'm like, oh, okay. Why is this news? Now, some people in the space have definitely taken shots at that report because, again, why bring that up now if that has nothing to do with him inherently being fired by the team at this time? I just don't understand that from my point of view. And if they were trying to weaponize that for some reason to somehow explain him being out, I would think that's utter BS. And they need to cut that shit out completely. I'm not going to speak on that too fully because, again, I'd have to get a little more insight as to what exactly is the case around that. But it's interesting. It coincided with some other comments, the firing, that Adofo-Mensah had about Darnold just moving on from the team. And again, at that time, the Vikings themselves, they'd offered him the deal. They thought they had it in the bag. So it's not like they just let him completely go. But Seattle, at that time, they essentially gave him the full extension. They were willing to keep him around for multiple years. And even to my surprise at that point, I'm like, huh? Really? Like, okay. I don't know, again, at the time, if I was on that, you know, same kind of thinking. I didn't know if I was on board with it fully. But the Seahawks, again, had the confidence. They expressed that to him directly. And Darnold eventually took that over compared to the Vikings at that time. Apparently, from what I've been hearing, you know, all over the place. They'd only offered him the 1-year deal with a chance to move on from him afterwards. And again, all the noise surrounding that. Like, yes, those couple of games were just not great to end off the season for Darnold with the Vikings. We understand that. But it's like, damn. And even Justin Jefferson, with some recent quotes of his own in a USA Today interview, essentially said, hey, these aren't his exact words, but this man put up 35 touchdowns and 14 picks last season. He knows the playbook. He knows the offense. He's more than prepared to play. We definitely should have kept him at that time. And again, it would be remiss to make it all about that, relating to his firing. But there's a strong possibility that has so much to do with them being willing to move on from him like that. Again, this is just sudden, out of the blue. Nobody anticipated this coming whatsoever. But they still thought it was a good idea to make that decision in the first place. And that's not for no reason entirely. Also, too, the way I see it, he had a massive decision coming. Now, again, his picks overall, since being the Vikings GM, have not been the greatest moves out there. But one guy that he was most certainly able to land on was Jordan Addison. Of course, I've already mentioned how things could be interesting in that scenario in the event that Addison was potentially looking for a deal across, some point in the offseason. And, while that's definitely something to take into account, for Addison to, again, be the only guy you've seemingly landed on in this time. And yes, he's done a lot better in free agency. But, damn, ultimately, we gotta move on from these players. You have to be able to establish some kind of homegrown talent here. And to this point, it just wasn't consistent enough. So you combine all those things, and that is why they ended up making the decision. Again, I don't know what avenue they would be trying to spin what I mentioned earlier into. I hope they don't try to do anything malicious with that, right? There's no need to weaponize that if it's not relating to football whatsoever. But when it comes to that production, it's like, even if this guy's not homegrown, we could excuse it if you at least allow him to stick around, showcase the potential that he has with the team, and give them a fighting chance to win out. Your defense is established enough to where, with the way they performed this season, this was a playoff caliber team. Yet, that uncertainty at one of the most important positions in the game proved to cost you big time. Because, again, it's tough to always play revisionist history, and it's tough to chalk that up, as the particular reason why Adofo-Mensah is now fired. But again, relying more on Brosmer and McCarthy and even Carson Wentz at a time this season because of McCarthy's injury, right? Relying on those guys into what Sam Darnold has turned out to be now instantly proved to be a terrible idea by them. Terrible. The Ravens would hire Declan Doyle as offensive coordinator. This was the former OC and I believe quarterbacks guy for Chicago. And again, Ben Johnson was the one primarily calling the plays for Chicago throughout the entire season. But Doyle definitely had a role in how that offense was performing as well. One of the better overall in the entire league, as Williams was able to take that kind of ascent and next step in his sophomore season. to get the Bears all the way to the divisional round game before ultimately dropping it in anticlimactic fashion to the Rams. If he's got that on his resume now he gets an opportunity to call plays for a quarterback who has proven himself to be far superior at this point, with maybe even, I can't say overall, but definitely a better running back, singular, at his disposal in Derrick Henry to deploy. That could be definitely exciting for the Ravens to look into. Now, again, he's a bit of an unproven talent, and, those kinds of situations are ones where the Ravens would definitely want to get their hands on someone with a bit more experience overall. But at the same time, with names just being taken off already, left and right, you had to find a way to get creative. Because at that point, there would be, fewer alternatives to turn to. That you could look and say with a straight face, oh, hey, okay, we have all knowledge of what this individual can pull off. And we want to take an opportunity to pick up his services in any possible way. You didn't have too much of that remaining at the offensive coordinator position. Doyle is a truly rising coordinator in this situation. So to give him that room to tell you right then and right there whether or not he's worthy of handling the job, that's a smart move by the Ravens. Although I did not read fully into it, essentially the NFL is looking into a review for player safety penalties, that being any form of targeting, pass interference, horse collar tackles, etc. And they're discussing the potential to have the replay booth be involved with more of these calls. That is what the review is essentially made up of. I will definitely follow up on that with more information in time, because honestly, if that goes through and they determine that some of this stuff can pass, that does, serve as a good slew of potential rule changes and maybe even some new rule enforcements. Even with the league, saying that, hey, we're going to enforce such and such rule, having the replay booth get involved in that and, review penalties, maybe even make them challengeable at points of time, would continue to sound the alarm there. That, hey, we are truly taking these matters of player safety seriously. And we are also going to now strongly enforce these rules that we've been waiting so year to incorporate in these games. The Packers would sign Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball to multi-year extensions. I think Russ Ball is their president of football operations, and Brian Gutekunst obviously being the general manager. It makes sense. I have no complaints about that. The Steelers would hire Patrick Graham as defensive coordinator. The Bills would also hire Jim Leonhard as their defensive coordinator. The Falcons would hire Alex Van Pelt as quarterback's coach. Some major news from Patriots defensive coordinator Terrell Williams, who honestly was not on the sidelines this season and was tending more so to his off-the-field habits, as he was diagnosed with prostate cancer at some point in the offseason last year. He had to spend an extensive amount of time getting as healthy as possible, trying to rid himself of that. And it would be detailed that he did, in fact, as of last week, beat the cancer. He's now cancer-free. And from there, the major thing is, yes, big congratulations to him. Massive praise for being able to overcome a condition like that. It truly, it is not something that every single person who goes through it can say that they survived. It's always heartbreaking to hear those situations, involving those that don't. And here we have a case from Williams where through it all, despite him being at older age and greater risk, like this was pancreatic cancer. This was nothing to play about. You're going through that for days and months on end, and he overcomes all of that. I don't know about him potentially returning to the sideline. Most likely he's going to be taking it easy at this point for pretty much the rest of this time until things begin to ramp back up after the new league year. But man, he more than deserves that opportunity after all that work, all that stuff going on in your body, to completely sit back and rest. The Seahawks, according to multiple sources, I think this is a report that came from Seth Wickersham of ESPN. Apparently, they are going to be up for sale after Super Bowl 60. And this deals primarily with ownership. They apparently, per the valuation, could be worth as much as $7 to $8 billion upon sale. The Allens, the family, generally speaking, obviously the estate at this point, and Jody Allen, being the leader in the face of that ownership group at the time, they've done such a tremendous job with the team over the years, man. They truly have. So if this is a situation where they have to move forward and they have to sell the rights and the ownership of the team elsewhere, man, they honestly should be getting so much credit for what they've been able to do with the organization. Like, there's no bad blood there whatsoever. This genuinely comes down to a business thing, and it is what it is at that point. So you can't harbor anything towards them at all. They're doing what they have to do in this situation. It's just like, man, you really hope, especially if you're a Seahawks fan, right? This has been a team that, honestly, at least in the 2000s, at least since I've been alive, right, they have honestly avoided the kind of dysfunctional label that most other franchises have had to deal with for such a long time. And you would hope that that is retained. You hope that this owner is actually going to show some of the same kind of involvement with the team that the Allen estate and Jody Allen did. Instead of being completely hands-off and just trying to cash in a major investment on a team that you absolutely have no interest in truly serving, that you don't know shit about. And, doing all this for a sport that, again, you aren't even willing to embrace it all. You don't want somebody detached in that situation. You want somebody with the same kind of intent and purpose behind their overall mission and vision for what the organization is going to look like for years to come. So if I see some bullshit, we're automatically going to be against that. There's no question about that. The Cardinals yesterday would hire Mike LaFleur as their new head coach, and they would sign him to a 5-year deal. Makes sense. LaFleur is the younger brother of Matt LaFleur, the Packers head coach that has recently been signed to a multi-year extension himself. And his name, honestly, with what he was doing as the offensive coordinator for the Rams over the past few seasons, this is a name that has constantly been in the head coaching cycle. But he decided, hey, I'm going to stick around for another season. And what a season it was for the Rams, generally speaking. Already mentioned that they were the top offense in the NFL. It goes without saying. Already mentioned that Stafford looked like a genuine MVP candidate and may very well, depending on how voters vote, finish as the winner to get his first MVP in his career. And it's truly deserved. He honestly, along with McVay calling the plays, it's like, damn, this is just a completely different beast you were dealing with anytime you had to go and face off against this team. And now, spending all that time under McVay, definitely taking notes under his tutelage, definitely garnering some more experience there. He's now taking that to an Arizona team that at the very least is just looking to become relevant in the conference again. Like, success is not going to be him, having some of the same trajectories that these first or second year coaches have had and just instantly turning them into a playoff contender. I don't expect that for Arizona just yet. But I do expect them to be far more competitive overall and potentially more competent on the offensive side of the football. Now, of course, a lot of that, centers around what exactly they're going to do with Kyler Murray. Are they actually going to let him walk, or are they going to try to work this out? Chances are, as Adam Schefter himself has reported at multiple points, that this is more than likely one of the last times you'll see him in a Cardinals uniform. We'll see how true that is throughout the offseason. And if it is, well, they're instantly going to have to look for a new leader on that offensive side. Also, with what LaFleur has been able to do. Because, again, you can say that McVay's going to have some responsibility in it. You can say that a wide receivers coach is going to have some more responsibility there. But LaFleur also gets some credit for developing Puka Nacua the way that he has. Truly. And all I'm saying is, to have Marvin Harrison Jr. potentially benefit from that tells me all that I need to know. And again, he's got to be healthy to be exposed to this kind of offensive output. But if that can happen, if that turnaround can be emphasized for them, along with what Michael Wilson was bringing to the table, not to mention how Trey McBride, as a, coach coming out of an offense that likes to run 13 personnel, as they've constantly brought up, if the same scheme is going down there, to have Trey McBride as that weapon at the tight end position, oh man, that makes them crazy on that front. We gonna see, but that should be fun. And again, it's a 5-year deal. So they are, as of this point, saying that, we're willing to invest long term in this. Again, we've seen coaches get fired after contract extensions all the time. Just the first year after signing one. Like, it's not a guarantee that he'll be there for 5 seasons. But of course, again, if he keeps performing well, if they don't totally just lose it all, and they continue to progress on a season-to-season basis, he could serve the entire thing. To round it out, the 49ers would hire Raheem Morris as their new defensive coordinator. The Dolphins would hire former Packers linebackers coach Sean Duggan as defensive coordinator to work alongside Jeff Hafley once again. And again, with what I've already said about Jordan Brooks at this point, not to mention some of the other linebackers that they may be able to bring in over time, hey, you could continue to see progression from Brooks in this regard. There is apparently a multi-year return for a regular season Madrid game that was announced by the NFL earlier. And they have also named the Saints as the home team for their game in France. Officially. Again, why that is, I just, man, doesn't make any sense, man. The 49ers would promote Al Guido to CL. And lastly, the Rams, after a largely successful season, would do the pretty optimal thing in re-signing both Les Snead and Sean McVay to contract extensions. Like, say what you want, neither of those guys are going anywhere. And yes, you can say that, oh, the Rams don't have a shit ton of draft capital like that. But again, their season, when you think about it, came down to a few plays. They are still good enough to be one of the more formidable teams across the entire league and a potential Super Bowl contender when they're at full strength. Like Snead's ability to make those decisions in the front office and also have enough trust in Sean McVay to continue to coach at such a high level. Like, I'm pretty sure that at this point they mentioned that Sean McVay just turned. Let me see. Yeah, he just turned 40. He just turned 40. The fact that he's already been off to this start in his NFL career, like, it is truly historical pace. So, like, this was a foregone conclusion. Like, barring anything crazy, you could argue that McVay, honestly, and again, this is saying a lot, you know, considering some of the other coaches that are around, right? But at this point of time, as of the recording of this video, amongst coaches that are still, you know, with the same team, rolling over from last season, I'll say that. I'm not going to look at new hires. That's just like, you can't group them into something like this. However, between Andy Reid and Sean McVay, those two are probably the safest jobs in the entire league. I don't think that's a world-breaking statement, but it just needed to be said. So them signing McVay to a contract extension makes sense, along with having Snead paired up there as well. The truly final piece of news. The Ravens, just a few minutes back, per Adam Schefter, before I even started recording this, they would hire Anthony Weaver as their next defensive coordinator. We are keeping it all in the Ravens connection. Weaver, obviously, a former player, there for the Ravens previously. And now, through it all, he is back in a defensive coordinator role with said team. I don't think it could have worked out any better for the Ravens from that perspective. There were probably better defensive coordinator hires that they could have gotten. But at the same time, sometimes you have to be willing to lean on that kind of connection in order to make a move like that. Sometimes you have to. Like, it's fitting for Weaver to be back with the squad. It truly is. He honestly knows that system, knows the identity of what that team should be better than most, especially in this cycle, can really attest to. Now, with them making the move, they'd been alluding to this at several points, and I guess with Monken being hired as a head coach for the Browns, there's probably a chance that Zach Orr is out, or maybe reducing his role to something of a lesser position on that side of the ball. Maybe back to linebackers coach. I'm not entirely sure. Because genuinely, like, everybody wants to say that Zach Orr is just now automatically gone. Well, we haven't heard anything about that. We haven't heard anything about that whatsoever. It could end up being true, but until we actually hear something about it, all that is truly just an assumption at this point. So I can't really say that I would know for sure about that. What I do know is that Weaver, like, there are so many weapons at his disposal already. Far more than what he was able to utilize in Miami. So right then, right there, you know, that should already help him immensely. The scheme could be a little interesting, but he'll definitely have time to figure that out. And again, depending on how you draft, you can add to it by getting an edge rusher of some kind, or maybe out of free agency with the money that you may have, acquiring an edge rusher. That's going to be the key to this entire Ravens defense. Because honestly, while they have great players at other positions, and while Kyle Hamilton, again, deservedly getting a Pro Bowl nod, being somewhat of an anchor for that defense, and a jack of all trades with his ability to pretty much do any and everything from most positions on the field. Unless you have a formidable pass rush, it's like none of that stuff is really going to be working. I would hope that the Ravens understand that at this point. They should. And from there, they can then move forward. But that'll do it for this one, actually. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.